From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, State of the Union, a forecast.
This coming Tuesday, January 28, President Obama will deliver his 5th State of the Union address. In it, he'll lay out to both houses of Congress and the public his plan of action for the coming year. The speech comes as Mr. Obama weathers storms over his presidency, including the glitch-ridden rollout of his signature Affordable Care Act website and the revelations of widespread surveillance of the American public by the National Security Agency, the NSA. Polls show our president with higher disapproval marks than approval. 54% disapprove of the way he's handling his job. 40% approve. The president nevertheless seems unbowed as he addressed his remaining 3 years in office in an engrossing and extended interview with David Remnick, editor of the New Yorker magazine. Quote, President Obama, "The conventional wisdom is that a president's second term is a matter of minimizing the damage and playing defense rather than playing offense. But as I've reminded my team the day after I was inaugurated for a second term, we're in charge of the largest organization on earth, and our capacity to do some good, both domestically and around the world, is unsurpassed, even if nobody is paying attention." Unquote. So says Mr. Obama.
Question, if you were advising the president on his State of the Union address next week and the remainder of his second term in general, what would you advise him to emphasize, Pat?
Well, John, I would say stay away from the Iran negotiations in Syria because they're divisive and they're problematic. And what you focus on is domestic policy and the whole beginning of the speech. And you start off and say, the American economy is recovering. Our growth is one of the fastest in the Western world. However, we've got problems, and one of the main problems of income and wealth inequality. And here's how we're going to deal with it. We're going to extend unemployment benefits. We're going to deal with the Hispanics in this country who are undocumented, bring them out of the shadows. That'll help. We want to raise the minimum wage. And I want to work with you in Congress on these things. But I have to tell you that if you don't work with me, I have a pen and I have a phone. And I'm going to do my best by executive order to keep this economy moving and keep it going forward. But I want your support.
That'll win a lot of support.
That's got the Democrats right out of their chair. They got Clarence is going crazy.
Clarence is clapping.
Eleanor, what would you advise me to do?
Pat's an old presidential speechwriter, and that was actually right on the mark.
So was I.
Well,
and believe me, that's not designed to win friends and influence people.
I thought that was pretty good. The president has to fully own Obamacare, which I believe he will, and there will be recipients of Obamacare in the audience sitting with the First Lady, because we're embarking now on a year-long, war that will culminate in the November elections as to whether it's an up or down vote on Obamacare. And then secondly, he's got to ask the Congress for immigration reform, for extended unemployment benefits, for raising the minimum wage, but he's got to make clear that he's prepared to go on his own, that he can act without Congress, and he's got to try to rekindle some of the lost promise of the last year to show that he still got some juice, and the people who have given up on him, it's too early. He's still lots he can do with that pen and that phone.
What would you advise him to emphasize?
Yeah, I certainly would have him focus on the economy, but I would have him particularly focus on education and how that is the key for a lot of people who are coming out of very low-income families or moderate-income families who want to have upward mobility, and that education is the key to upward mobility for all the Americans of that generation. And everybody needs to get behind that particular issue. That's the one issue I would really focus on, is education, particularly education in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the STEM, so-called STEM, because that's where the future of a lot of people can be, and it'll be a successful future.
What about the scoring of our children on education when placed in the international context? You've seen any of those
Yeah.
discouraging
They
results?
are discouraging because particularly our public education system, particularly in elementary school and high school, is actually quite weak when measured against everybody else. And yet this is the key to the future of not only the individuals, but of the country.
Clarence?
Indeed. Well, I can't hardly improve on what everyone has said already. I would just add that in the education area, I love to see some new ideas. I think one area he has not touched on much is in job training. He's talked about how we've fallen behind as far as the high school graduation gap, and college costs, of course, are soaring. I hope he addresses that. But also in between, job training, you've got to have some schooling beyond high school in order to have any increase in real wages in your life. I'd like to see something like what Germany has done, subsidizing private businesses that have job training programs, and thus they bring in workers perhaps on reduced salary while they're learning a trade, learning to do something with their hands. This also has done wonders for closing the gender gap. Girls are doing better than boys now in their academic achievement, and partly because girls are just better behaved, I think, in the classroom.
Well, people always want to know what are the new ideas, and if they have new ones, they haven't telegraphed them yet. And short of new ideas, they're going to repeat all the old ones, and I think that's fine. I mean, I think that basically a lot of people are going to be tuning in, not only just watching TV. The way this White House is going to disseminate this speech through all the social media, it's not just the ratings, the TV ratings you have to look at. You have to look at the ways that they get the message out, and they got to energize young people to vote in next November, which is almost a year from now.
Yeah, I'm hearing things here that are good ideas, but I'm not sure we've hit one hard enough, and that is fix Obamacare. He's got to almost apologize for saying that if you like your insurance, you can keep it. He should stress that the Obamacare can be corrected. It can be made a useful instrument of this democracy.
Yeah, but don't be
he can do it.
But don't be too defensive. I mean, look, if I'm
Be very defensive.
No.
I mean, don't be too defensive.
You might be correct when you say, look, the mistakes have clearly been made in the handling of this and this and this, but 2 million people have signed up, more are signing up, and if we got problems with it, why don't we work together to fix it?
Pat, I
attitude.
think you've just jumped parties here.
Look, you asked me to write the speech.
I know, right, okay. The check's in the mail.
Well, you know, he misled people.
Yeah, but
He
they
misled
are,
them.
they are
It was
improving.
not
Crap when a
intentional.
president
It was
does
not
that.
intentional, and he has apologized endlessly for that. He's poked fun at himself.
Hey, John, let me
so
say
I
something.
don't
Well, he
know.
should, but now it's kind of floating out there by itself.
But you know,
Well,
John,
It's floating out there for a good reason. He used it in about 25 speeches before it became famous. And you have to ask yourself, not only that he said it, but nobody in his staff checked out what he was saying.
You know,
when it
John,
was wrong, it was a huge...
Actually,
it
there
finally-
was some internal conflict
Well,
about
there
that.
may have, but
he
what it did,
exaggerated a
it
bit.
not only affected his respect, it affected the sense of competency and the way people looked at his competency.
but you know,
He
John,
can also, however, he can also stress some of the good things that seem to
But
have
he al-
emerged,
I think-
and that is we're getting out
That's
of
right.
Afghanistan.
well, yeah, okay, but foreign policy is deeply divisive. Iran is, but I think Clarence is onto something, to be honest. Frankly, I think vocational schools and high school and things like that, where kids, if they're not learning all the academic stuff, you can teach them things. When I was growing up, we had plenty of them in D.C. Our problem is, Clarence, we lost 6 million manufacturing jobs in the first decade of the 21st century.
Yeah, but
All right, I've got to
it's
move this
coming
forward.
back, though.
I'm going to move this
Manufacturing is
forward
coming back.
because we're not striking all of the right notes. One sure state of the Union theme will be economic, I believe, inequality.
So let me repeat. The combined trends of increased inequality and decreasing mobility pose a fundamental threat to the American dream, our way of life, and what we stand for around the globe.
So said President Obama in December last month,
Simply a moral claim
and the theme of economic inequality will be one he repeats next Tuesday during his State of the Union address. The president's focus comes just as a major study from Oxfam International, an anti-poverty group made up of 17 organizations working in more than 90 countries, released some startling statistics. Get this. The richest 85 people in the world own more wealth than the poorest half of the entire world's population. Oxfam has also found that 7 in 10 people live in countries where economic inequality has widened. And the U.S. tops that list. In the U.S., the richest 1%, quote, captured 95% of the post-financial crisis growth since 2009, unquote, while the bottom 90%'s wealth decreased. It's not all dire news, however. That's if you believe Bill Gates. Gates attributes better farming methods and new vaccinations and the digital revolution to back up his big prediction. Quote, by 2035, there will be almost no poor countries left in the world. Almost all countries will be what we now call lower middle income or richer, unquote.
Question, not to parse words, but what's the most recent research on economic mobility? And is President Obama right when he says it is slowing down? Mort.
Well, there is, frankly, very limited economic mobility, and frankly, it goes back to what I was saying before. The educational differences in America are really staggering, and that is the pathway and the ladder to economic mobility. We've had the least amount of economic mobility in the last, certainly during his presidency, that we've had since the end of World War II. And
the recent study came out this week showed that there's an enormous amount of economic mobility, quite frankly. But look, John, let's take a look at the last 50 years or something. All of Eastern Europe is free, their standard of living is up, the whole Soviet Union came apart, Communist China, Mao's China, I was there. You had great equality there when Nixon and I were there in 1972. Then now you got billionaires and millionaires and people making 100,000 and people making nothing. Inequality is not the problem as long as everybody is moving up. Who cares that Mort's got $1 billion and you and I may not?
Wait a minute. You go too far, Pat.
Don't understate the man's wealth like that.
No more short.
But I agree. Inequality is not the issue. Jobs are the issue, and education is the issue. Those are the kinds of the issues that we have to deal with.
Jobs and income are not working the way they're supposed to have created this huge gap, and we're now looking like kind of like a banana republic, which is not what this country is all about. And the president in that David Remnick New Yorker article meeting with academics and asking, how can I talk about this growing inequality without everybody screaming class warfare? And I think now Republicans agree it's a problem too. Now the debate is about what do you do about it? And Democrats are, you know, you have progressives who want to raise taxes on people who make over $500,000, which I think is a great idea, but that's not enough. And you've got the old Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, you know, centrists who feel it's all about job growth. This president has put up all these job plans before Congress. He can't get them through Congress. So he's left really to, you know, plead, raise the minimum wage. It's hard to get new jobs programs.
You're making too many excuses for him. He's a very, very skilled rhetorician. And he can clarify this whole business if he really wants to do it.
Oh, I
Exit
hope he
question. Will President Obama emphasize in his State of the Union address, will it be pro-growth, economic policies to create opportunity, or will it be economic redistribution, spread the wealth, as Barack said to Joe the plumber? Remember that?
Yeah, I think what he's going to emphasize is A, the economy's growing, it's growing, but B, there is economic inequality. But he isn't going to say, let's redistribute the wealth. He's going to say, here's the minimum wage, here's immigration reform, here's unemployment benefits, here's education, all these things. He's not going to say, let's redistribute the wealth.
No, it's not either or. And actually, there's a lot of good economic news that he can point to. I mean, we're on our way to becoming energy independent. The deficit has come down more in the last year than in some time. He's already frowning over here, but I think there's expectation that growth is going to be much higher this coming year. I think it's looking good. He can't say it's perfect because it's not, but there's some
Sing
good
the blues
news.
to her, will you?
Well, on the front page of the Financial Times today, they point out that the willingness of American business to spend on plant and equipment, which is a multiplier of all multipliers in the economy, is at the lowest level since the end of World War II, 1.2%. This is unbelievably a statement about what the business people who know what their industries are like, what they think about the economic future. So there is a lot of apprehension about where this economy is going, and we are growing at a very, very low rate. So let me give you one more statistic. The average rate of growth in the 4 years coming out of every recession we've had, there were 8 of them, since the end of World War II, 4 years on average was 4.1%. We have been growing at a rate of about 2.2%. That's a huge decline in the rate of growth over the last 4 years.
Because of the uncertainty, though, that industry faces. They don't want to invest in an uncertain future. I think the more Obama shows that we're not going to have so much uncertainty, that we're going to have more stability over the next year, you're going to see more confidence. Because Wall Street's doing great. Why is that? Because people with money do have...
the last 2 days, Clarence.
The last 2 days. 2 days. Look at the last year, Pat. I mean,
They pocketed a lot.
The other thing is the immediacy of this action by Obama, because he's going to be settling into the strict lame duck status. The talk is already excessive with regard to who's going to run in 2016.
John, that is such...
He's going to be a lame duck in a year.
John, I was with Ronald Reagan in his second term. He wasn't any lame duck. He's going to Russia. He's getting arms control agreements. He got a huge tax cut. You don't have to be you're a lame duck if you've got the attitude of a lame duck.
Yeah, he likes Reagan, by the way, and he's read some Reagan work, and he's clearly that he thinks Reagan...
That's who he ought to sound like.
Well, you ought to tell him that.
It's
your duty, Pat. Issue 2, Syriana.
He has long since, because of his choice of weapons, because of what he has done, lost any legitimacy. Who can imagine that tomorrow or in a week or in a month you could suddenly say, oh, okay, it's all right. You can lead Syria.
In the opening day of talks to resolve the Syrian civil war, Secretary of State John Kerry demanded that Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad step down and cede power to a transitional government. Quote, Bashar Assad will not be part of that transition government, unquote. Kerry's position reflects the international consensus of the 2012 Geneva Communique, which called for the conference to establish a ceasefire and interim government for Syria. The peace talks convened by the United Nations got off to a testy start when Syria's foreign minister refused to give up the microphone after UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon chided him for exceeding his allotted time. Both the Syrian opposition and the Assad regime traded charges of terrorism and war crime over the course of the 3-year-long civil war, in which some 130,000 Syrians have died. Syria has complied with demands that it surrender its chemical weapons, and Syrian government troops have the upper hand in the fighting. Syria's information minister, Amran Zubi, was blunt, quote, there will be no transfer of power and President Bashar Assad is staying, unquote. Furthermore, the Obama administration hopes for Assad to turn over power with dealt a setback days before the talks opened, when Iran refused to send a delegation to Switzerland because of the precondition that it abide by the objective of creating a post-Assad government. Iran is a staunch ally of Bashar al-Assad. Iranian troops are fighting in Syria, and Iranian aircraft keep Assad's regime supplied with aid and weapons. On a separate track, negotiations with Iran over ending its nuclear program are progressing, with UN monitors verifying this week that Iran has stopped down its uranium enrichment.
Question, can a truce be brokered in Syria without Iran's agreement? Pat Buchanan.
No, it can't, John. And I think a truce is possible, but I think John Kerry made a terrible mistake going over there. First, he's ineffectual. He denounces this guy, but he can't do a thing about it. Secondly, if you're going to have negotiations, you at least ought to start off on a stately note rather than that attack. But I do think that, frankly, there's been atrocities on all sides. But I do think the Syrian government, because it has the whip hand right now, is probably ready for local truces and things like that. I think the best we can hope out of this thing is to stop the killing and slaughter in various places, get humanitarian in there, aid in there, and anything that contributes to that is a good end. Why Iran was disinvited, one reason is the opposition Syrians would have walked out if Iran had walked in, but ultimately they and Hezbollah and Russia have all got to be on board if there's going to be a peace agreement.
Aren't they all on board?
Well, Iran is not even in there. Of course, Hezbollah's not in there. The Russians are there.
Yeah.
But it's heavily weighted on the other side.
Clearly, Iran's on board.
You should have the Saudis and the Qatars, everybody who's pouring arms in there. I think everybody should be at the table, but that's not the decision that the diplomats made. Now, I give Kerry a lot of credit for pushing ahead on this. You maybe didn't like his opening statement, but it was the same tenor as all the other players there. These are the opening bids. He's there, we're not. And I think if they can get some sort of reprieve to get humanitarian aid and medicine through, Assad and the rebels too, to some extent, are using food and medicine as weapons of war. It's almost worse than the chemical weapons. I mean, it's really a brutal scene over there.
Well, that's why you want a truce.
Not
Absolutely.
But,
or
Mort.
a reprieve, if you want to call it something other than a truce.
I couldn't agree with you more that it is a brutal scene, what is going on the ground, what has been going on the ground, the numbers of people who have been killed, the way they have been killed, the number of people whose families have been wiped out. I don't see how it's going to get better. The only way that the Syrian government will move is if there is some real threat to their livelihood and existence, and that threat does not exist. And as long as we can't find a way to really put pressure on them, I don't think there's going to be much hope that we're going to get anything of substance out of this negotiation.
Or if Assad is given some assurance he can stay. I mean, I think this administration is far out on a limb saying he has to go. But I don't know that getting rid of him right now would improve the situation.
Do we want Assad to fall?
Need to climb down
do we
from
want
that.
No,
Assad?
we do not.
I do mean, look, the victors will be Al-Qaeda and these jihadists. Just this week, John, the guy that runs Al-Qaeda urged his allies to go against Iran, go against Assad, go against Russia. These are our enemies. Look, if our allies Al-Qaeda, I mean, what kind of war do we want to get into, Mort?
Well, we need.
Listen, this is what I call a lot of bad choices.
I was just going to say we need some kind of solidarity to isolate Assad, because you're right. We're not going to be sending troops in there, and we're not going to necessarily right away get him to step down. We got to just begin the process, which is what's happening now. So as long as we're still talking, there's hope.
The internal conflicts within Iran, not Iran, but within Syria, are so great that without Assad, the whole situation would fly out of control.
You can say the same thing in Iraq, Afghanistan.
Issue 3, centrist versus liberal.
The state will pay for it, and the state will be proud to pay for it. It's a priority. We believe in children. We believe in pre-K. We believe in education. Let's put our money where our mouth is.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo unveiled his plan to bring universal pre-kindergarten to his state this week in his annual budget address. Governor Cuomo, who is also up for re-election, is making good on a top Democratic education priority. President Obama also embraced universal pre-K, as it is called, in his State of the Union address last year. Mr. Obama has not managed to muster support at the federal level, but the idea has caught on in New York, including New York City. The new mayor, Bill de Blasio, has his own universal pre-K plan for the 5 boroughs. Mayor de Blasio, a progressive Democrat, wants to hike taxes on those who make more than $500,000 a year to pay for it. Cuomo, a centrist Democrat who served in the Clinton administration, is campaigning on a $2 billion cut in state taxes this year. De Blasio's plan conflicts directly with Cuomo's plan, pitting Democrat against Democrat in the latest example of the growing split between Obama progressives, i.e. liberals, and Clinton centrists. These dueling universal pre-K plans will now be settled by the New York legislature, which has the ultimate say in passing laws to create universal pre-kindergarten education and how to pay for it.
Who will win if the mayor and the governor battle it out in the New York legislature over universal pre-K? Mort, you're a New Yorker, what?
It's not even close. The governor is going to win hands down. He's put the mayor in a corner, okay? He's got the ability to put this program across the state, not just in New York, and without any additional taxes. He's got two big giant steps ahead of the mayor. The mayor says, look, I was elected on this platform. He was certainly elected, and by a huge margin. There's no way that he's going to get the tax increase that he wants through the state legislature, which he must get, without the governor's support. So this is a game over situation at this stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, a direct confrontation like that is true. Cuomo holds the cards at the state level. I think you've seen a situation where Cuomo had a run-in with the cardinal over a quote that he had given that had been actually misquoted in terms of saying if you're anti-gun control, if you're pro-life,
pro-assault weapon, and anti-homosexual, you have no place in New York. But he's talking about candidates.
Right. Can you slow that down? What did he say?
If you're pro-life, pro-assault weapon, and anti-homosexual, you have no place in New York. He's talking about candidates running for political office.
All right, now
that's not a winning platform in New York.
You may wish to wipe the slate clean, but Buffalo Bishop Richard Malone on Wednesday, Eleanor, called the comments by Cuomo the best example of extremism I've heard for a long time. What do you think of that?
I think that's a statement that has no basis in fact.
It is not terribly inclusive to say candidates who agree with Ronald Reagan and Billy Graham and Pope John Paul II on pro-life have no place in New York State. If I recall correctly, Reagan carried New York State.
I think a pro-choice candidate, a pro-gun control candidate who supports gay rights would not fare very well in a number of states in this country.
That's not what Cuomo said. They don't belong in New York.
That's the import of what he was saying. He said they have no political future in New York.
No, he was talking about politics, and it was misinterpreted. And when you look at the actual copy of what he said, it's clear that was the context of the question. And so he's probably, in political terms, right. You could say he shouldn't have said that, but it certainly is probably a political fact in New York State.
He was talking like a political operative.
Let's get it straight what Cuomo said. The governor drew criticism nationwide from conservatives and Republicans for his remarks during a public radio interview last week about how he defined, quote, extremist conservatives, unquote, as those who are against abortion rights, gun control measures, and gay marriage, and said people with such views have no place in New York.
That's half the country he's talking about, and on guns, it's more than half the country.
What do you think of that, Pat?
I think he's made a foolish statement that has severely damaged himself, despite what Eleanor has said in his defense.
You've had the last word, Pat. Who can beat Hillary in 2016?
Right now, no one.
No one.
Only Hillary can beat Hillary.
Oh.
If she mucks up her campaign, then she would have trouble.
That's a good answer.
That's the only way she will lose.
That's kind of what happened last time.
Are you clinging to Mort?
There could be a dark horse coming from somewhere, but I don't know who that is.
We are both clinging to you, Mort. Bye-bye.